Organic Thesis of CO2 and Climate Change. Whoa, wait a second. How can we have global warming with so much record cold? For the same reason we have record droughts and deluges. Simple reason, the organic properties of carbon dioxide. CO2 properties are why we have record droughts and deluges. One of CO2's most common commercial facts is its carbonating water by soaking into water up to 30% of volume. Consider the flip side, that is, atmospheric carbon dioxide soaking up water. This is different from evaporation. Increased CO2 in the air means more water soaked up from the ground or not falling to the ground. At timeism.com, it has been documented that large CO2 sources cause downwind droughts as the CO2-laden winds soak up water. One can see this in CO2 cloaking clouds, fogs, and hurricanes. Consider the relation of oil fields to droughts. Why downwind droughts? The average barrel of oil has 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas that becomes thousands of cubic feet of CO2 when burned off. The 1930s U.S. Dust Bowl was downwind from the first massive U.S. oil field in East Texas, Spindletop. After World War II, West Texas oil fields were drilled, and a second Dust Bowl arose, downwind until economic factors reduced output by 65%. The droughts plaguing equatorial East Africa result from the CO2-laden air from upwind Arabia. Billions of tons of desiccating CO2 come from daily burning off the natural gas. The Alaskan pipeline is like the syringe in a drug addict's vein. Pothole Bay Petroleum gives a short-term high that results in destroying the body of the user. Global temperatures have risen 1 degree since 1970. The Arctic has risen over 7 degrees. Alaskans are paying for the thawing tundras, far more than the few dollars they get from this syringe coursing down Alaska's core. Oil lines are killing more people than those who mainline drugs. West Africa has had, like East Africa, the socio-economic and political chaos from droughts that can be found to originate in the upwind oil fields of Nigeria. China's latest great leap forward has ignited a vicious cycle of needing more energy and more water. China has had record droughts and sandstorms that are transparent to national borders, as both Korea and Japan can attest. Long before the 2010 British Petrophilia Gulf disaster, the U.S. agencies responsible for managing resources were cooking the books. This was evident in the East Coast droughts, which came from massive deep water wells illegally burning off billions of cubic feet of natural gas. The rise of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda can be correlated with the development of upwind oil fields that destroyed downwind agriculture. The elephant in the room of humanity is global dying from rising CO2 levels. Brazil has an ever larger drought envelope developing from the east coast of its booty. Yep, caressing its butt with plumes of CO2 winds are Brazil's offshore deepwater wells, some of the biggest in the world. A third U.S. Dust Bowl has developed in the southwest. This can be tied to the upwind production of electricity at massive plants burning fossil fuels. This montage shows how the western U.S. and Canada have drought conditions from increased energy production in western Canada. What is the name of their hockey team in Edmonton, Alberta? The Edmonton Oilers. And the name of the jet stream from western Canada? The Alberta Clipper. This is one of the author's favorite montages, in which one can see an overlap of Canada's energy fields and associated downwind drought fire areas. Cool. Hot. Australia has been in a drought condition for over a decade. It is easy to see why. Notice the oil field in the upper left image against the wind pattern in the upper right. The fire, a Christmas fire from the drought-stricken outback, burned up 1/4 of Australia's capital, including the university. This 2010 satellite image shows Siberia covered with smoke from fires in western Russia. The underlying record drought is due to the Russians selling gas upwind to Europe, which comes back as desiccating CO2 air masses. Buttressing the organic CO2 thesis are the flip-flops seen from variations in oil field production and downwind precipitation. The 1930 Dust Bowl began with the massive East Texas Spindletop oil field. It ended with the start of World War II when production dropped over 65%. Construction of pipelines to transport oil and gas to the industrial heartland prevented reappearance of the Dust Bowl. Dust Bowl II began with the rapid development of the West Texan Permian Basin after the Second World War. It ended with a 60% production drop with the import of cheap Arab oil in 1956. The Horn of Africa drought began in the mid-60s when Saudi production exceeded 8 million barrels per day. An interesting thing happened in the early 1970s when the rains returned for about 9 months. This coincided with OPEC oil embargo when Saudi production dropped 95%. One can see both the initial drought and flip-flop drought from the U.S. Gulf oil fields, where monster wells burn off massive amounts of CO2. The average U.S. oil well pumps 7 barrels a day. As shown with the British petrophiliac disasters, Gulf of Mexico wells blast massive ejections of oil. As the GOM wells increased, a downwind drought envelope expanded on the east coast of the U.S. When the gas pipeline was finished, the drought went away. The CO2 relation of oil fields and downwind droughts should be obvious to the reader. Not as obvious as the more distant deluges when the absconded water is suddenly released, the soda bottle shake. One can detail a timeline of worsening droughts and deluges. In 2010, the desiccant deluge cycle was marked by the monster Russian drought fires and the downwind monster Pakistani deluge floods. These are nothing compared to coming disaster. Time to bargain with the devil or buy passage with Noah. CO2's organic properties cloak water. Clouds are formed by water binding to the particles that become large enough to refract sunlight. In CO2 forming small 32-to-1 clusters, there is no refraction of light. Thus, the CO2 cloaks the water into invisibility. An obvious example of CO2 absorbing cloaking water is the visible shape of hurricanes. Compare Andrew 92 and Allison 01. Both were season first. Allison is sucking in the CO2 from Texas, cloaking that section. A hurricane's life shows donuts in the mid-Atlantic that become CO2 blastomas when they approach CO2 generators. While visibility disappears, hurricane winds remain. A more mundane, down-to-earth example of cloaking is watching clouds approaching a city. This cloud sequence shows the clouds dissipating and disappearing towards the ground. When a plane leaves a contrail, it is a low CO2 atmosphere. When you see the high-flying object with no contrail, the icy residue has been cloaked by the dryness of CO2. Another example of cloaking water were the experiments to remove fog from airfields by burning natural gas. It worked, but cost too much. Every gallon of gas that you burn displaces about 32 gallons of water from your environment. If it was like wife swapping, it wouldn't matter. If everyone swapped all the time everywhere, it would be a zero-sum world. Regions would be swapping rainfall. But Mother Nature, God's accountant on Earth, is celibate, with random and worsening punishment of drought or deluge for those who rape her. In summary, CO2 soaks into and soaks up water, creating invisible masses of water-laden air that come out suddenly. For these two facts, many record-breaking, seemingly contradictory climate changes can be explained. CO2-laden air masses are like ocean currents, carrying the originating temperatures farther. An example is the Atlantic current, which keeps the British Isles warmer than comparable latitudes. Similar to ocean currents are the polar jet streams. Increased CO2 concentrations carry more polar coldness farther south for longer periods. The difference between dry and CO2-laden air can be seen in the difference between the quickly disappearing cold cloud from opening your refrigerator and the ever-expanding, non-stopping floor fog from dropping frozen CO2 into water at a dance or a wedding. Apropos to its desiccating property is how frozen CO2 is called dry ice. A terrible antecedent precedes the recent record cold spells in the lower latitudes from CO2-laden polar jet streams. The coldness and moisture comes from stripping the polar ice mass. This prevents replenishing the polar ice match, which speeds up thawing the tundra, melting the glaciers, and shrinking the ice cap. The polar ice cap gone by 2012 or 2013, humanity will only have a few years before lingering heat waves destroy the food chain. Recall the pitcher of lemonade on the porch, refreshingly cool until the ice melts. We are all on death row, facing ever-worsening droughts, fires, blizzards, and deluges. If not, earthquakes. Why and how did we get on a death row of all life on Earth? Petrophiliacs, like this habitual politician addicted to campaign contributions. They choose ignorance over knowledge. His voters have only themselves to blame for the declining quality of life as the elephants in the room, global dying and GOP, stamp out life on Earth. More disgusting are the weathermen on TV. 50% of weathermen don't believe in global warming. They should know better. They spend more on Botox than CE courses. But one needs only realize that weatherheads are entertainers, not educators. Most are joker workers.